The harsh September sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Copper Creek, a small frontier town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. The year was 1887, and the town bore the weathered scars of countless seasons: wooden buildings with peeling paint, hitching posts worn smooth by countless rains, and the ever-present dust that seemed to coat everything in a fine, gritty layer. Young Danny Fletcher, barely 14 years old, stood before the imposing figure of Ezra Blackwood, one of the most respected yet feared ranchers in 3 counties. Donnie's clothes were little more than patched rags, his boots so worn that his toes nearly peeked through the leather. His face, gaunt from weeks of poor meals, carried an expression of desperate determination that seemed far too mature for his years. Behind Danny, clinging to his torn shirt sleeve, stood his younger sister Lucy. At 9 years old, she was small for her age, with platinum blonde hair that caught the sunlight despite its tangled state. Her large blue eyes, wide with fear and confusion, darted between her brother and the tall, intimidating rancher before them. She clutched a small, threadbare doll, the only remnant of their life before they became orphans. On the unforgiving frontier, Ezra Blackwood stood at least 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling out a well-tailored brown coat despite the heat. His face was weathered like old leather, marked by years under the relentless sun and harsh winds. A thick, graying mustache shadowed his upper lip, and his dark eyes seemed to peer right through a person, as if weighing their very soul. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his features, making his expression even more unreadable. Fearing an outlaw gang was hunting him, the orphan Danny made a desperate plea to the formidable rancher, Ezra Blackwood, take his innocent sister in his place. The boy offered his own life in exchange for hers, a sacrifice born of fierce love. But the stone-faced rancher, a man who had built an empire and lost a family, saw more than just a bargain. He saw a test of character, and as he looked at the 2 children, he made a decision that would change all their lives, but not for the reasons they believed. She's smart. She can work. She can learn. She won't be any trouble. I promise you that. Lucy tugged harder at her brother's shirt, her small voice barely audible. Danny, what are you saying? I don't want to go anywhere without you. We promised Mama and Papa we'd stay together. Remember? The mention of their deceased parents sent a visible tremor through Dan's composure. His jaw clenched, and for a moment his facade of grown-up responsibility cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath. But he quickly composed himself, kneeling down to Lucy's level and taking her small hands in his. Lucy, listen to me, he said softly, his voice gentle despite the urgency of the situation. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard decisions to protect the people they love. Mr. Blackwood here, he's got a big ranch with lots of space. You'd have a real bed to sleep in, 3 meals a day. Maybe even go to school like Mama always wanted. Tears began to stream down Lucy's dirt-streaked cheeks. But what about you, Danny? What's going to happen to you, Danny? Forced a smile, though his own eyes were beginning to glisten with unshed tears. Don't you worry about me, little sister. I'm tough. Remember, I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll head west, find work in California or Oregon. But you deserve better than living on the streets, scourging for scraps and sleeping in abandoned buildings. Ezra Blackwood had remained silent throughout this exchange, his dark eyes observing every gesture, every word, every emotion that passed between the siblings. The other townspeople went about their business around them. The blacksmith's hammer rang out from his shop. A wagon creaked past, loaded with supplies, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. But in this small circle of desperation, time seemed suspended. Finally, the rancher spoke, his voice deep and growly from years of shouting over cattle and wind. Boy, you say the Morrison gang is after you. That's a serious claim. Jed Morrison and his boys don't leave witnesses. That's true enough. But what makes you so sure they know it was you who saw them? Danny straightened up, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. I was hiding behind some barrels outside the general store when they came running out of the bank. One of them, the tall one with the scar across his cheek. He looked right at me. Our eyes met for just a second, but it was enough. I saw recognition there, sir. He knew I could identify him. And you're willing to sacrifice yourself for this little one. Ezra's gaze shifted to Lucy, who was now openly sobbing into her doll. She's all I got left in this world, Mr. Blackwood. Our parents died in the cholera outbreak last spring. We've been on our own ever since, trying to make do. But this is different. This is life or death, and I won't let her pay for something that ain't her fault. The rancher was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the two children. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting longer shadows across the dusty street. A tumbleweed rolled past, pushed by a warm breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "What if I told you I might be willing to take both of you?" Ezra said finally, his tone carefully neutral. Donnie's eyes widened with surprise, then quickly narrowed with suspicion. "Both of us. But sir, I told you they're after me. I'd just be bringing trouble to your doorstep. The Morrison gang. They're not the kind of men who give up easy. They'll come looking." "Let me worry about the Morrison gang," Ezra replied, adjusting his hat slightly. "I've dealt with outlaws before. My ranch is well defended, and I've got enough men working for me who can handle trouble if it comes calling." For the first time since the conversation began, hope flickered in Donnie's eyes, but it was quickly tempered by weariness. In his short life, he'd learned that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "Why would you do that, sir? Take both of us. I mean, you don't even know us. We could be lying, or trouble, or could be," Ezra agreed. "But I've got my reasons. Tell you what, boy. You and your sister, you come with me to my ranch. Give it a month. If the Morrison gang is really after you, we'll know soon enough. If they come, we'll deal with them. If they don't," he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Lucy had stopped crying and was looking up at the rancher with a mixture of hope and terror. Would we really get to stay together? Ezra looked down at her, and for just a moment something that might have been kindness flickered across his hard features. "That's the idea, little miss." Danny stood up slowly, his mind racing. Everything about this seemed too good to be true, but what choice did he have? The Morrison gang was real. He'd seen them with his own eyes. The scar-faced man had definitely recognized him, and winter was coming. He and Lucy wouldn't survive another season on the streets. "What would you want from us in return?" Danny asked, his voice cautious. "I mean, if you're taking both of us, feeding us, giving us shelter, there's got to be something you want in exchange." "Work," Ezra replied simply. "My ranch is big, and there's always plenty to do. You look strong enough for your age, and everyone on my spread earns their keep. The girl can help with cooking, cleaning, tending the chickens. Nothing too hard, but everyone contributes." It seemed reasonable, more than reasonable. It seemed like a dream come true. But Danny had learned not to trust dreams. "When would we leave?" he asked. "Right now," Ezra said, untying Thunder's reins from the hitching post. "I've got a supply wagon coming through in about an hour. You two can ride in the back. My ranch is about a day's ride from here, up in the foothills." Danny looked around the dusty street of Copper Creek, taking in the ramshackle buildings and tired faces of the town's people. This place had never been home. Not really. Home had been wherever he and Lucy were together, whether that was in an abandoned barn or under a bridge or in the alley behind the bakery. "Lucy," he said, kneeling down beside his sister again. "What do you think? Do you want to go with Mr. Blackwood?" Lucy clutched her doll tighter and nodded slowly. "If you're coming too, Danny, I won't go without you. I'll be right there with you, I promise." Ezra mounted his horse with practiced ease, looking down at the two children from his elevated position. "There's just one thing you both need to understand," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Once we leave this town, once you come to my ranch, there's no going back. You'll be under my protection, but you'll also be under my authority. You do what I say when I say it. No questions asked. Is that clear?" Danny nodded immediately. "Yes, sir. We understand." "Good. Now gather up whatever belongings you have. We leave in an hour." As Ezra rode away to make arrangements for their departure, Danny and Lucy stood alone in the dusty street. The reality of what they were about to do was beginning to sink in. "Danny," Lucy said quietly, "do you really think the bad men are coming for you?" Danny looked down at his sister, his heart breaking at the trust and innocence in her eyes. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure. He had seen something that night at the bank robbery, but whether the Morrison gang really knew he could identify them, that was less certain. But the possibility was enough. He couldn't risk Lucy's life on uncertainty. "I think we'll be safer with Mr. Blackwood," he said finally. And even if the bad men don't come, at least we'll have a roof over our heads and food in our stomachs. They spent the next hour gathering their few possessions, some spare clothes, a small knife that had belonged to their father, and a locket with their mother's picture inside. Everything fit into a single burlap sack. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, a supply wagon rolled up the main street. The driver was a grizzled old man with tobacco-stained teeth and calloused hands. Ezra rode alongside the wagon, gesturing for Danny and Lucy to climb into the back among the sacks of grain and barrels of supplies. "This is it," Danny whispered to Lucy as they settled into the wagon bed. "Our new life starts now." Lucy snuggled close to her brother, still clutching her doll. "I'm scared, Danny." "Me too," he admitted, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "But we'll be okay. We've got each other, and that's all that matters." As the wagon began to roll, carrying them away from Copper Creek and toward an uncertain future, neither child noticed the calculating look in Ezra Blackwood's eyes or the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth. The first part of his plan was complete. Now came the real test. The journey to Ezra Blackwood's ranch took them through some of the most spectacular and unforgiving terrain in the territory. As the supply wagon creaked and bounced along the rough mountain trails, Danny and Lucy got their first real taste of the raw beauty and harsh realities of the American frontier. The landscape gradually transformed from the dusty flatlands around Copper Creek to rolling hills covered in scrub brush and wild grass. As they climbed higher into the foothills, pine trees began to appear, their dark green branches providing welcome patches of shade. The air grew cooler and thinner, carrying the crisp scent of mountain snow, even in the late summer heat. Danny found himself marveling at the vastness of it all. Having spent most of his life in small frontier towns, he'd never imagined country like this existed. Eagles soared overhead, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. In the distance, elk grazed peacefully in mountain meadows, looking up wearily as the wagon passed, but not bothering to run unless the travelers came too close. "Look, Lucy," he whispered, pointing to a family of deer drinking from a crystal-clear stream that ran alongside the trail. "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" Lucy, who had been mostly silent since they left town, peered over the side of the wagon with wide eyes. Despite her fear and uncertainty about their situation, she couldn't help but be amazed by the natural splendor surrounding them. "It's like something from one of Mama's fairy tales," she whispered back. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered grove of aspen trees. The wagon driver, who had introduced himself simply as Old Pete, unhitched the horses and began preparing a simple meal of beans and hardtack over a small campfire. Ezra had been largely silent during the journey, riding alongside the wagon on his black stallion, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain. "Mr. Blackwood," Danny ventured as they sat around the flickering campfire, "how much further to your ranch?" "We'll be there by mid-morning tomorrow." Ezra replied, his weathered face illuminated by the orange glow of the flames. "My spread covers most of the valley. You'll see when we crest the next ridge. Been building it up for the better part of 20 years now." "It must be quite something," Danny said, trying to make conversation and learn more about the man who was offering them shelter. It is Ezra agreed, but offered no further details. Instead, he turned his attention to Lucy, who was sitting quietly beside her brother, still clutching her doll. "What's your doll's name, little one?" Lucy looked up shyly. "Her name is Annie. She was Mama's when she was little." "Annie's a fine name," Ezra said, his voice gentler than Danny had heard it before. "I bet she's seen a lot of adventures with you." For the first time since they'd left Copper Creek, Lucy smiled. "She has. Danny and me, we tell her stories about all the places we've been and all the things we've seen." "What kind of stories?" Lucy's eyes lit up as she began to talk about their adventures. How they'd once spent a week hiding in an old mine shaft during a terrible storm. How Danny had traded his only good pair of boots for food when she was sick with fever. How they'd learned to catch fish with their bare hands when they couldn't afford fishing line. As Lucy talked, Danny noticed that Ezra was listening intently, his dark eyes never leaving the little girl's face. There was something about the rancher's expression that Danny couldn't quite read. Not exactly kindness, but not cruelty either. It was more like evaluation, as if he were weighing something in his mind. You've been through quite a lot for such young ones, Ezra observed when Lucy finished her stories. We take care of each other, Danny said firmly. We always have. I can see that. Ezra stood up, brushing dust from his pants. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. They slept under the stars that night, wrapped in blankets that old Pete had provided. Danny lay awake for a long time, staring up at the vast expanse of the night sky and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Beside him, Lucy slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, her small hand still gripping Annie the doll. The next morning dawned clear and cool with a hint of frost on the grass that disappeared as soon as the sun touched it. After a quick breakfast of coffee and leftover beans, they were back on the trail climbing steadily through increasingly rugged terrain. It was nearly noon when they finally crested the ridge that Ezra had mentioned, and the view that spread out before them took Donnie's breath away. The valley below was like something from a dream, vast and green, with a river winding through its center like a silver ribbon. Scattered across the valley floor were hundreds of cattle looking like tiny dots from this height, and there nestled against a grove of cottonwood trees near the river stood the ranch buildings. Even from a distance, Danny could see that this was no ordinary homestead. The main house was large and well-built with a wide porch and what looked like a second story. There were several other buildings, barns, bunkhouses, corral, all arranged in a neat, organized pattern that spoke of prosperity and careful planning. "Welcome to the Blackwood Ranch," Ezra said, riding up beside the wagon. There was unmistakable pride in his voice, and for the first time since Danny had met him, the rancher's expression showed genuine emotion. It's incredible," Donnie breathed. "I've never seen anything like it. Took me 20 years to build all this," Ezra said. "Started with nothing but a horse, a gun, and a dream. Now I've got the biggest spread in 3 counties, the finest cattle, the best horses, everything a man could want." There was something in his tone that made Danny look at him more closely. Everything a man could want. But something was missing. Danny couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a loneliness in Ezra's eyes that all the land and cattle in the world couldn't fill. The descent into the valley took another hour, winding down a well-maintained trail that showed evidence of regular use by wagons and riders. As they drew closer to the ranch buildings, Danny could see more details. The solid construction of the barns, the neat fences surrounding the corral, the well-tended vegetable garden behind the main house. Several ranch hands came out to greet them as the wagon rolled into the main yard. They were a diverse group, young and old, some obviously longtime cow hands, and others who looked like they might have been farmers or shopkeepers before coming to work for Ezra. What they all had in common was a respectful weariness around their boss, nodding politely but keeping their distance. "Miguel." Ezra called to a middle-aged Mexican man who appeared to be the ranch foreman. "Take care of the supplies. I'll be showing our new arrivals around." "Si, patron," Miguel replied. But Danny caught him casting curious glances at the 2 children as he began organizing the unloading of the wagon. Ezra helped Lucy down from the wagon, his large hands gentle as he steadied her on the ground. "What do you think, little Miss Pretty? Different from town, isn't it?" Lucy nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling activity of the ranch. "It's so big," she whispered. "That it is. And if you're going to live here, you'll need to learn your way around. Come on, both of you. Let me show you where you'll be staying." He led them toward a smaller building, set apart from the main bunkhouses. It was well-built but modest, with 2 small rooms and a stone fireplace. "This used to be my office back when the ranch was smaller," Ezra explained. "Had it cleaned out and furnished for you, too. There's a bed in each room, a table, some chairs. Basic but comfortable." Danny walked through the little house in amazement. After months of sleeping on the ground or in abandoned buildings, having an actual roof over their heads and beds to sleep in seemed like unimaginable luxury. This is wonderful, Mr. Blackwood. I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," Ezra replied. "Remember what I said about everyone earning their keep. Tomorrow morning you'll start learning what that means. For now, get settled in. Miguel's wife Rosa will bring you some food shortly, and there's a wash basin and soap on the table if you want to clean up." After Ezra left, Danny and Lucy stood in their new home, scarcely able to believe their good fortune. "Danny," Lucy said softly, "is this real? Are we really going to live here, I think?" So Danny replied, though a part of him was still waiting for the catch. "But remember what Mr. Blackwood said about earning our keep. We'll have to work hard to stay here. I don't mind working, Lucy said firmly. Anything's better than being hungry and cold and scared all the time. That evening, as promised, Rosa, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, brought them a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and milk. She spoke limited English, but her warm smile and gentle manner made both children feel welcome. After they had eaten their fill, she returned with clean clothes that, while not new, were in far better condition than anything they had worn in months. Mnyana, she said, pointing to herself and then to Lucy. You come with me, Nina. Learn to help in the kitchen. See, Lucy nodded eagerly. The prospect of learning to cook in a real kitchen, rather than scavenging for scraps, filled her with excitement. That night, as they settled into their respective beds, real beds with actual mattresses and clean sheets, Danny found himself thinking about their incredible change of fortune. Just 24 hours ago, they had been homeless orphans, facing an uncertain and dangerous future. Now, they had a roof over their heads, food in their stomachs, and the promise of honest work. It was almost too good to be true, which Danny's experience had taught him usually meant it was. But as he drifted off to sleep, listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the corral, the whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had finally found a place where they could build a real life. He was awakened before dawn by the sound of a bell ringing across the ranchard. Outside his window, he could see lanterns moving in the darkness as the ranch hands began their daily routine. A few minutes later, there was a knock at their door. Time to get up, Ezra's voice called from outside. The day starts early on a working ranch. Danny quickly dressed and woke Lucy, helping her into the clothes that Rosa had brought the night before. When they opened the door, they found Ezra waiting for them, already dressed for a day's work in practical clothes and wearing a wide-brimmed hat against the sun. First lesson, he said without preamble. On this ranch, we start work when the sun comes up, and we don't stop until the sun goes down. There's always something that needs doing, and everyone, including you two, has responsibilities. He led them to the main corral where several of the ranch hands were already saddling horses and preparing for the day's work. Danny, you'll be working with Miguel and the other hands. You'll start with simple tasks, mending fences, mucking out stalls, feeding the horses. Nothing too complicated, but important work that needs doing right. Yes, sir, Danny replied, trying to hide his nervousness. He had never worked with cattle or horses before, but he was determined to prove himself worthy of the shelter and kindness they were being shown. Lucy, you'll help Rosa in the kitchen and around the house, cooking, cleaning, tending the vegetable garden. Think you can handle that? Yes, Mr. Blackwood, Lucy said eagerly. Rosa seems very nice. She is. She's been with us for 5 years now, ever since her husband started working here. She'll teach you everything you need to know. For the next several hours, Danny threw himself into his work with determined enthusiasm. Miguel proved to be a patient teacher, showing him how to properly muck out horse stalls, how to mend broken fence posts, and how to handle the ranch horses safely. The work was hard and dirty, but Danny had never minded hard work. What mattered was that he was earning his keep, proving that he and Lucy deserved the sanctuary they had been given. By midday, however, he was exhausted. The high altitude and physical demands of ranch work were taking their toll on his already thin frame. His hands were blistered, his back ached, and sweat had soaked through his shirt despite the cool mountain air. Take a break, muchacho, Miguel said kindly, noticing Danny's fatigue. You're working too hard. This isn't a race. I'm fine. Danny insisted, though he was swaying slightly on his feet. I can keep going. No, you take break. Rosa has lunch ready. Go eat. Rest a little. The work will still be here when you come back. Reluctantly, Danny made his way to the main house, where he found Lucy in the kitchen with Rosa learning to knead bread dough. His sister looked happier than he had seen her in months, her face flushed with pride as she showed off her new skills. Danny, look what Rosa taught me, she called out excitedly, holding up a small, somewhat misshapen loaf. I made bread. That's wonderful, Lucy, Danny said, genuinely pleased to see her thriving in their new environment. Rosa served them a hearty lunch of soup, fresh bread, and cold milk. As they ate, she chatted away in a mixture of Spanish and English, clearly delighted to have someone new to teach and care for. Lucy hung on her every word, eager to absorb everything she could learn. It was during this peaceful meal that Danny first began to notice something odd. Several times he caught Rosa glancing at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret, not unfriendly but evaluative, as if she was studying him, watching for something specific. After lunch, Danny returned to his work with renewed energy, determined to prove himself worthy of the trust that had been placed in him. The afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor, repairing a broken gate, hauling feed to the cattle, helping to break in a young horse that had been giving the more experienced hands trouble. It was this last task that proved to be the most revealing. The horse, a spirited bay mare named Tempest, had been fighting every attempt to saddle her, rearing and bucking whenever anyone approached with tack. The ranch hands had been taking turns trying to calm her, but without success. "She's got spirit. I'll give her that," one of the cow hands said, shaking his head as Tempest reared up again, her eyes rolling wildly. Danny approached the corral fence, drawn by something he saw in the mare's behavior. He had always had a way with animals. It was one of the few talents that had served him and Lucy well during their time on the streets. Stray dogs and cats had often led them to food scraps or safe places to sleep, as if sensing his genuine care for their welfare. "She's not mean," Danny said quietly, studying the horse's body language. "She's scared. Something happened to her, something that made her afraid of people." Miguel, who had been watching the proceedings from nearby, looked at Danny with interest. "You think so? How can you tell? See how she keeps looking toward the gate and the way she favors her left side when she moves. I think someone hurt her, maybe hit her, or used spurs too hard. She's not fighting because she's wild. She's fighting because she thinks we're going to hurt her." Without waiting for permission, Danny climbed over the fence and into the corral. The other ranch hands stepped back clearly, thinking he was about to make a foolish and potentially dangerous mistake. "Easy, girl," Danny said softly, approaching Tempest with slow, deliberate movements. "Nobody's going to hurt you. I know what it's like to be scared, to not know who you can trust." Tempest snorted and backed away, but she didn't rear or try to kick. Something in Danny's voice and his calm, unhurried approach seemed to reach her. "I know you don't understand my words," Danny continued, stopping several feet away and crouching down to make himself seem less threatening. "But maybe you can understand that I'm not going to hurt you. I've been hurt too, and I know how awful it feels." For long minutes, boy and horse regarded each other across the dusty corral. The ranch hands watched in fascination as Tempest gradually relaxed, her ears coming forward and her breathing becoming less labored. Slowly, carefully, Danny extended his hand toward her, palm up and fingers relaxed. "That's it, girl. I'm not going to grab you or force you to do anything. I just want to be your friend." Tempest took a cautious step forward, then another. Finally, she stretched out her neck and gently nuzzled Danny's outstretched hand, her soft muzzle investigating the strange boy, who spoke to her with such understanding. "Incredible," Miguel breathed. "In 3 days, none of us could get within 10 ft of her." Danny spent the next hour with Tempest, gradually gaining her trust and confidence. By the end of their session, he was able to touch her neck and shoulders, and she had even allowed him to slip a simple rope halter over her head. "You have a gift," Muchacho Miguel said as Danny finally left the corral. "I've been working with horses for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Animals just need to know they're safe," Danny replied modestly. "Once they trust you, they'll do anything for you." It was as he was walking back toward the bunkhouse that Danny noticed Ezra watching him from the porch of the main house. The ranch's expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity to his gaze that made Danny suddenly self-conscious. That evening, as the ranch settled into its nightly routine, Ezra appeared at the door of the small house where Danny and Lucy were staying. "I'd like to talk to you, boy," he said. Outside, Danny's heart began to race. Had he done something wrong? Was Ezra having second thoughts about taking them in? They walked in silence to a small rise overlooking the main ranchard. From here, they could see the entire spread, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the horses in the corral, the lights beginning to flicker on in the bunkhouses as the hands settled in for the evening. "I hear you had some success with Tempest today," Ezra said finally. "Yes, sir. She's not a bad horse, just scared. I think with patience, she'll come around. Miguel tells me you have a natural way with animals. Says he's never seen anything like it." Danny shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just try to understand what they're feeling." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying Danny's face in the fading light. Tell me something, boy. If you had to choose between saving your own life and saving your sister's, what would you do? The question caught Danny off guard. What do you mean, sir? I mean exactly what I said. If it came down to your life or hers and you could only save one, which would it be? Danny didn't hesitate. Hers, Lucy's life is worth more than mine. She's innocent. She's never hurt anyone. If something happened to me, at least she'd have a chance at a real life, even if it meant you'd die. Even then, Ezra nodded slowly, as if Danny's answer had confirmed something he had already suspected. And if someone told you that the only way to save her was to do something difficult, something that might seem wrong on the surface, but would ultimately protect her? I'd do whatever it took, Danny replied without hesitation. Lucy is all I have in this world. I'd give up anything for her. Anything, anything. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, watching the sun disappear behind the mountain peaks. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening heavens. Danny, Ezra said finally, his voice gentler than the boy had ever heard it. What if I told you that there never was any Morrison gang coming after you? Danny felt the world tilt beneath his feet. What? What do you mean I mean? That the whole story about being recognized during the bank robbery, about them wanting to kill you, to keep you quiet. What if none of that was true, but I saw them? I was there when they robbed the bank. And that man with the scar, he looked right at me. The bank was robbed, that's true enough. And there was a gang involved. But they've been caught. Danny Sheriff in Copper Creek got them 3 days after the robbery. They're sitting in jail right now, waiting for the circuit judge to come through. Danny's legs suddenly felt weak, and he sank down onto a nearby boulder. Then why did I agree to take you and your sister when you thought your lives were in danger? Ezra finished the question for him. Because I wanted to see what kind of person you really were. I wanted to know if you were the kind of brother who would sacrifice himself for his sister, or the kind who would use her as an excuse to get what he wanted. The full implications of what Ezra was saying began to dawn on Danny. You made it all up. The whole thing about taking us to your ranch, about protecting us from the gang. No, boy. I brought you here, and I meant what I said about giving you a home if you proved yourselves worthy. But the test wasn't about whether you could work hard or follow orders. The test was about the kind of people you are deep down when everything is stripped away, and all that matters is what you're willing to do for the people you love. Danny felt a mixture of relief, confusion, and anger washing over him. So there was never any real danger. Lucy was never in any real trouble. She was in trouble, Danny. Both of you were. Winter's coming, and you had nowhere to go, no way to take care of yourselves. That's real danger, even if it doesn't come with guns and threats. Ezra sat down on another boulder facing Danny across the small clearing. I've been watching you both for the past few days. I've seen how you work, how you treat the animals, how you talk to your sister, and I've seen the kind of loyalty you have for each other. But why put us through all this? Why not just, I don't know, offer to help us directly? Because Danny, I needed to know if you were the kind of people I could trust with something very important to me. What do you mean? Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face reflecting emotions that Danny was only beginning to understand. This ranch, everything you see here, I built it all by myself. Worked 20 years to create something that would last, something that would mean something. But what's the point of building an empire if you have no one to leave it to? Donnie's eyes widened as the implications of Ezra's words began to sink in. You don't have any family, had a wife once and a son? They both died in the same Cola outbreak that took your parents just a few months earlier. Since then, I've been alone trying to figure out what to do with everything I've built. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry. I didn't know. How could you? I don't talk about it. Don't let it show. But the truth is, I've been looking for someone to carry on what I've started here. Someone who understands the value of loyalty, of family, of doing what's right, even when it's hard. Ezra stood up, his tall frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky. I heard about you and your sister in town. Heard how you'd been taking care of each other since your parents died. And I thought maybe these are the kind of people who could understand what this place means. So the whole thing bringing us here, the story about the gang, it was all a test. It was all a test. And you passed Danny. Both of you did. The way you were willing to sacrifice yourself for Lucy, the way she trusted you completely even when she was scared. The way you've both thrown yourselves into the work here without complaining. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Danny sat in stunned silence trying to process everything he had just learned. The relief of knowing there was no gang after them mixed with confusion about what this all meant for their future. What happens now? He asked finally. Now, if you're willing, you and Lucy become part of this ranch permanently, not as hired hands or charity cases, but as family. I'd like to adopt both of you legally and officially, make you my heirs, teach you everything you need to know to run this place when I'm gone. You want to adopt us. Really, I do, but only if that's what you want too. I won't force it on you. If you'd rather strike out on your own, I'll give you supplies and money to get started somewhere else. The choice is yours. Danny thought about all the nights he and Lucy had slept in cold alleyways, all the days they had gone hungry, all the times they had been afraid and alone. And he thought about the warmth of the little house Ezra had given them, the satisfaction of honest work, the feeling of belonging that had begun to grow in his heart over the past few days. Lucy, he said finally, I'd have to talk to Lucy. This affects her too. Of course. Take all the time you need to think about it, both of you. This is a big decision, and I want you to be sure. They walked back toward the ranch buildings in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the small house where Danny and Lucy were staying, they could see warm light spilling from the windows and hear the soft sound of Lucy's voice inside, probably talking to her doll, Annie. Mr. Blackwood, Danny said as they reached the door, thank you for everything, for giving us a chance for the test, for wanting us to be your family. Thank you, Danny, for being the kind of person worth taking a chance on. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Danny Blackwood stood on the same rise where he and Ezra had had their life-changing conversation. The valley below was dusted with snow, and the cattle had been moved to winter pastures closer to the ranch buildings. In his hands, he held the official adoption papers that had arrived from the territorial capital just the day before. He and Lucy were now legally the children of Ezra Blackwood, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with that title. Lucy came running up the hill behind him, her cheeks red from the cold, and her eyes bright with excitement. Danny Rosa says she's going to teach me how to make Christmas cookies today. Real ones with sugar and everything. That sounds wonderful, Lucy. He smiled, watching as she spun around in the snow, her laughter echoing across the quiet landscape. Are you happy here, Danny? Really happy? Danny thought about the question seriously before answering. They had a real home now, a real family, and a future that stretched out before them, filled with possibilities. Ezra had been true to his word, teaching them everything about running the ranch and treating them as his own children in every way that mattered. Yes, Lucy, I'm happier than I ever thought possible. Me too, she said, slipping her mittened hand into his. I love it here, and I love Papa Ezra. Papa Ezra. The name had come naturally to Lucy, and hearing it never failed to bring a smile to the gruff rancher's face. As they stood together on the hill, watching the sun rise over their new home, Danny reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. The test that had initially felt like deception now seemed like the greatest gift they could have received. It had shown them and Ezra that they were the kind of family who would fight for each other, sacrifice for each other, and ultimately choose love over fear every single time. The Morrison gang had been nothing more than a story, but the bond between the three of them was absolutely real, and that Danny thought as he watched smoke curl up from the chimney of their home was worth more than all the cattle and land in the territory. Come on, he said to Lucy, squeezing her hand gently. Let's go home. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this incredible story of family loyalty and second chances. Subscribe for more amazing Wild West tales and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more captivating stories from the American frontier. Until next time, keep riding into the sunset.